Hello, Tom. We're here today to try out a new format, which I called Psi Demystified. And can you give us a brief explanation of what the viewers can expect?
Well, the idea is that we will pick a particular psi phenomena to talk about. We'll discuss a little bit about what that is, and then I will try to explain how MBT, my big toe theory, explains that.
Okay, great. So for today's first episode, we'll start with a topic that caused a bit of controversy on your YouTube channel because you posted the German documentary I created about 5 German kids that can see without their physical eyes. I have inserted a few clips from a documentary here, which the viewers can see right now, about the backstory on how I got started with this topic. So within our German discussion group, I found which I founded many years ago, several parents had their own kids learn this skill, which led to Evelyn, the German teacher who taught the kids, invite me and to one of her events where the kids, which she previously taught, that skill meet again for an afternoon to play. And that's where I actually shot my documentary. So since the phenomena was already introduced quite extensively through the documentary, we'll skip over any further introduction and refer people who want to learn more about the phenomena to watch the documentary first. For this episode, we'll go right to the second part of explaining how it might work. So, Tom, would you please explain how the children can see without their eyes, or is it probably all just a big fraud like some of the comments on your YouTube channel imply?
Well, Oliver, this was one of the special cases for me because mostly I see things like this. People send me a lot of videos, and I look at them, but you never know when you see a video, is that real or not? Because on the videos, toasters can fly and pigs can talk. So it's hard to know when you see a video exactly what's real and what's not. But in this case, I had a tremendous advantage. I happen to personally know the person who made this video, who was doing the documentary. And Oliver, I've known you for years now, and I know you are a very straight shooter. You are an engineer, electrical engineer, I believe. And you think like an engineer and you do logic like an engineer. And I know that if you were there and you looked at the details and I noticed that you asked the very best questions, then there was no question in my mind that this is real. It's exactly as presented. What we have here is not a case of remote viewing, but more a case of remote seeing. So that's kind of a remote viewing without the constraints of just looking at a picture or looking at a scene. This is remote viewing where you're really viewing what's going on right in front of you. What's going on in your reality. You're remote viewing the things that you could see. So that is possible to do because remote viewing is just collecting data from a database. It's a very straightforward procedure. In order for this virtual reality to function, the system needs to produce a couple of databases. One of them is the future probable database. And then as time moves on, what's in the future probable database, which is everything that possibly could happen and the probability that it might, turns into the past database, which is everything that could have happened and the probability that it would have. And that past database also has a thread running through it, which is what actually did happen. And if you turn to that, if you get that data, then you're seeing basically into the past. Well, this past is only 10 to the minus 44 seconds past. So that's just about as current, as it needs to be. Not being able to see that very last 10 to the minus 44 second is really not noticeable to anybody. So basically you can look at what we call our present, even as though it is the just past that we're looking at. And if that's a problem conceptually, think of the time that it takes the light to bounce off of the subject that you look at and then get into your eyes. So you're seeing it a little after the event happened because you have to wait for the light to get to you. Well, we know that's very, very fast, and it's sort of like that. So that's what these children are doing. They're collecting data out of the database. I don't know that we have enough time to go into a whole lot of detail here about why the system has to have that database, but it is integral to the way it renders this virtual reality. Now, that's based on my concept, the MBT concept, that this is a virtual reality. Consciousness is the computer. The computer is a piece of the larger consciousness system, as are we, as are all those children and their parents, and you and I. We're all pieces of consciousness. I call that an individuated unit of consciousness. And we are logged on playing an avatar in this game. Now, we can, because we're consciousness and not the avatar, we can have access to the larger consciousness system and its databases. That's there. And if anybody listening to this feels that remote viewing is also kind of a bogus idea, well, you just haven't been doing your homework. If you go to the internet and actually spend, say, a week or two studying remote viewing, doing some research, you'll find that there's hundreds of hours of remote viewing experiments that have been done under very strict protocols, and there really is no discussion or no argument anymore whether or not remote viewing is a real thing. It is a real thing. It's been done many, many, many times, like I say, with very strict scientific protocols. So we know remote viewing is a thing. And of course, MBT explains that as the remote viewer is just getting data out of that database. Well, now these children are getting data, even more data. They're getting a stream of data that shows what's right in front of them. That's what they're remote viewing. And it just continues to run as time moves on. So remote seeing is just as easy to explain as remote viewing. So that's really what's happening here. It's children getting data out of a database. Now, why children? Well, in order to see with your mind's eye, that is, in order to get data out of these databases, there's a few things you have to do. And one of those is you have to do your thinking, if you will, your interaction from what I call the being level, as opposed to your intellectual level. As long as you're just thinking about it, nothing much is going to happen. And that has to do with all of the psi phenomena. These phenomena have to be executed at the being level. Okay, now most of us, and particularly adults, the older you get, the more you buy in to materialism, the more you buy into this reality being a material reality, and you know that things that don't fit the material description, things like remote viewing, healing with your mind, or like these children are doing, remote seeing, those become just impossibilities. Well, if that's part of your belief system, then you just automatically, shall we say, censor the data that comes to you, and you only look at the stuff that falls within your belief system. So if things are impossible to your belief, then you will get the data, but you'll just throw it out. You'll pass it, you'll pass it off as being data of no particular import, or scurrilous data, or what do we call it, data that's outside the norm, and you don't process it. So that's what belief does for us. In my books, I talk about a belief trap. When you have beliefs, then you're in a trap. You can't see past that belief. That belief defines your reality, and anything outside of that definition is just not processed. So that's why it takes a long time to train an adult. I think something like 5 days, whereas most children in a day or two can begin seeing without their eyes. And this is not a new phenomenon. It's not like this just happened. There have been counts of people being able to see without their eyes, scattered all through. Well, I don't know. I guess I've been aware of it through the last, 40 or 50 years. People, was out in a Colorado area, and there was a young man there who drove a car, and he was blind since birth, and yet he could get in an automobile and drive it around. Things like that have happened off and on, kind of individual cases. But this is the first time that I know that groups of children have been taught. And the thing that's amazing about this, Oliver, is that these aren't special children. It's not like they went through 1,000 children to find 5 or 6 that could do this. These were just children that happened to be around at the time that somebody was doing it, and they said, oh, I'd like to do that too. And neighbors of children who were doing it, and older brothers and sisters, and that sort of thing. So somebody started it, and then it just kind of spread around the people who knew that individual. So we have the idea that almost any child can learn this. And the second thing that's amazing is that it doesn't take that long. A child can learn this in a couple of days. Doesn't take it's not a real difficult thing to learn. So with those two amazing aspects to this, that it's just any child seems to be able to do it pretty much, and that it's not hard for them to do it because they still see the world as a magic place in many respects. So these children are like something like, I think maybe 5 to 15 would be an age, or maybe less than that, maybe like 6 to 12, something in that range. Before they understand more about how the world works and find out what's impossible and what isn't, they have a much wider viewpoint of what might be possible. And because of that, they don't block the information. And because of that, they can be trained really, really easily. So that's sort of the thumbnail sketch of how it works. It is just a kind of a branch of remote viewing called remote seeing that is not as constrained as remote viewing.
Okay, just to add a few things to what you just said. So Evelyn told me that she taught about 700 children so far, and out of the 700, only 7, so 1%, did not learn it. So 99% made it, but these were all somewhere in the age range of 6 to 12, which is the range where she says it's really easy to learn. So just what you just said.
And I bet the ones that didn't learn it, those 7 that didn't, I bet were on the older group. They were probably in the 11 and 12 range, or maybe a little higher.
I don't have any information on that, but it definitely makes sense that that's the case, yeah. And also to add, out of the group members, what I told you about the drum group members who had their kids trained, all of them needed less than 2 hours to learn it. And when I was at Evelyn's place, she had a 5-year-old boy with her who learned it, and he learned it within minutes. So it's absolutely amazing. The younger they are, the faster it goes.
Sure. Yes. The less preconceived notions of what's possible and what's not possible, the younger they are. I mean, children that age live in they think the world is a magical place. When they get into an automobile and drive off, they don't understand that there's an internal combustion engine, going through, 4 cycles that is driving the car through a transmission and a gearbox. They don't know any of that. They just know it's this magic thing that you get into, and a parent sits down at the thing, it makes a little noise, and off you go. So they never question things like that. They don't say, well, how does this work? They just accept that all sorts of strange things work, from turning on electric lights to getting into a car to getting into an airplane. Their whole day is full of things that just work, just happen. It's just the way they are. And they don't have a sense of that being they don't look at it from an engineering viewpoint. So they're open to things happening. When somebody says, oh, you can look through these goggles or this mask, you can look through this mask and you can see a little point of light, and then you can grow that point of light into, vision into the room, and they just say, oh, okay. And they give it a try. So that's the thing. This childlike, innocence isn't the right word, but lack of belief in the way things should be is what makes it work for them. Indeed, I have people send me email all the time that say, Tom, since I was reading your book, I started your book and I read it for over 3 weeks. And during that 3 weeks, all kinds of paranormal things started to happen to me. Well, it wasn't that reading a book makes paranormal things happen, except when you read this book, you get the sense that these things are possible. And just getting the sense that these things are possible is what makes them happen. So adults can do this too. They just have some unlearning to do before they should expect to be able to do it.
Okay, great. So I would like to address one of the fraud claims, because I think it's reasonable to be skeptic. And since I'm an engineer, I was also skeptical at the beginning. So I would just like to address this whole mask issue for a second. And I've prepared a short video, which I will show right now while we are talking about it, of the mask which I used with the kids. So this mask is identical to the model that the kids own themselves, except that the kids' masks have a white front cover. As you can see, the foam is very soft, which ensures that there are no gaps between the foam and the skin. The distance of the foam in the nose area to the eye hole is 1.7 centimeters, which equals 2/3 of an inch. And the elastic rubber band, which pulls the mask onto the face, condenses this foam material in all areas, including the nose. So these masks are really different from cheaper models, which I also tried. But these cheaper models actually have no foam and they had gaps. So I could see through those. And that's the reason why I actually bought this, in my opinion, highly overpriced Mindfold mask to do the test with these kids. So I should also mention that these Mindfold masks are not sold for the purpose of seeing without eyes, but they are actually sold as a sleeping aid with the guarantee to block all light so that people can sleep, for example, while on a plane or in a well-lit area. So my own tests of the masks did not reveal any issues with gaps or physical holes that one could see through. Any comments on the whole mask subject, Tom?
Well, yes, from your video, it's obvious that this mask is a full coverage mask. It's not just around the eyes. It's way up in the middle of the forehead and down, over the cheekbones and up over the nose sort of thing. So even if there was a leak there, they still would not be able to see. You see, let's say you took a little toothpick or something, a little piece of wood, and you stuck it under the band, and a little tiny hole would open up right next to the toothpick because the foam wouldn't be able to make that 90-degree bend. Well, you can't see with that unless light directly comes from your subject to your eye, you won't see it. If it's got to reflect off something first, you won't see it. That's why you can't look at a white wall and see what's behind you. You see, so you need a direct line from whatever it is you're looking at, from the object that you're seeing, to your eyeball. So even if a little light were to slip around the edges of this mask, that still would not allow a child to play what was it, air hockey, that game where the little puck floats on the air and you knock it back and forth. It would not allow you to do things like that. You just maybe would see a little light coming in around the edges, but that doesn't allow you to see. So because of the size of the mask and because of the way this foam is made and the way it expands and is compressed everywhere, the mask is not a problem. The mask is not something that, okay, they can see around it or they can see out the edges. Nonsense. This mask makes their vision dark. They cannot see in this mask. And even if it did leak at the edge, it wouldn't matter. They still couldn't see because the light can't come in around the edge of that mask because that edge goes all the way, past where the eyeballs can see. You can't see your forehead. You can't see over there, by your ears. You can't see down around the edges of your nose. These are places that are outside your vision. And if a little light did go in there, wouldn't make any difference whatsoever. But as you say, no light does go in there. It's a really good mask that does indeed block out all the light.
Okay, actually, to add on to what you just said, it might actually, and that might be counterintuitive to any skeptics, be actually a problem if there was a little bit of light visible, because at least to what I learned from Evelyn and her partner is the kids need the complete darkness to actually see these images. So as soon as there would be like even a little hole where they could not even see something through, but if there was light in the mask suddenly, it would be problematic to actually see or create these images. So it's kind of the other way around, right?
Yes, exactly. And maybe I should talk a little bit about the explanation of the mask. What is the mask doing? Well, the mask is a prop, okay? The mask is not necessary. The mask is just a prop. It's a metaphor. It's the way you shut out all light so that then you can focus on seeing light in the mind's eye. You can start focusing on the data. And like you say, if there was light coming in, that would just confuse the situation. It would make it more difficult. So the fact that it's completely dark makes it easy. So though the mask isn't necessary, you could close your eyes, or you could just, you could do some other sort of thing. There's nothing magic about this particular mask other than it's a good one because it shuts out all the light. But the mask is part of a metaphor that shuts out all the other data. So when you close your eyes, I guess when you have this mask on, most people would have their eyes closed as well. You're seeing with your mind's eye now. You're using your consciousness to get data from a database. That's your consciousness is acting like what's making the query to the database. You're wondering what's out there, and as you have that question in your mind, that query starts the data flowing. Okay? And if you're open to it, then you'll start to receive that data. So the mask is not a particular piece of this. It's just a prop, if you will, that helps the practitioner do this more easily. Without the mask, they could hold their hands, they could just shut their eyes, they could be in a totally dark room. You see, all of those things will all work as well. So don't think that the mask is part of this. The mask enables it. The mask just makes it easier for someone to do this and still be standing up playing air hockey.
Okay, maybe we should actually address the whole eyelid thing, because I asked the kids, well, can you also do it with your eyelids closed? And all of them said, no, we cannot see fully with that. We can only distinguish colors. And I also talked with Evelyn about that, and she told me that at least the explanation model is when you close your eyes, there's some kind of mechanism in your brain that kind of tells your visual cortex, even if there would be some kind of information coming in, your eyes are closed, you cannot see anything. So in that case, it is suppressed just by the logic of the brain that eyes closed, no visual image. But you can also override that. So there are people, and I even know somebody, but that person doesn't want to be on camera. They can close their eyes and they can read. So it is possible,
Yes.
but that's really difficult to overcome that mental barrier.
Yes, it's just another belief. I can't read, I can't see because my eyes are shut. You see, it's another belief. And what allows these kids to see is that they have this metaphorical concept, and that is they put this mask over their face that makes everything dark. Then they eventually see a little dot of white light. This is how it was explained to me on the video in the documentary. They'll see a little dot of white light. And the more they look at that dot, the more it opens up and it grows, and pretty soon it's just like a hole that you can see through. So you see, we have a metaphor of a hole in the mask, and that's what allows them to see. Well, that's just justification for the mind to let this happen, to enable it. But if you say, well, if I close my eyes, I can't see anything, well, now you have a belief, and that belief will make it so that you can't see anything. But, oh, I have this mask on, and yeah, I see that little dot of light. Okay, yeah, I can make it bigger and bigger, and yeah, now I can see through it. So in their mind, they're not doing anything magical like seeing through a mask. They're actually looking through little holes. That's how they see. Well, that's not how they see. It has nothing to do with little holes. The masks don't have any little holes in them. The masks are solid. That's just a metaphor. The holes in the mask are a metaphor that the children use to justify to their mind how this is being done. You see? So if you didn't have a mask, then you wouldn't be able to use that metaphor. That would make it harder. So if you just close your eyes, yes, that can be done just as well. Matter of fact, it could be done with eyes open. You could have your eyes open and you could be seeing through your mind's eye at the same time, and that would be parallel processing. You would have two images and you could integrate those two such that if you wore glasses, let's say, you could take your glasses off and walk around and see just fine with your eyes open. You see, all of that is possible. It's just much harder to do because it creates a bunch of belief blocks that make it more difficult for us. And it's not as easy to justify to our mind that why it works as a mask over our eyes that has holes in it that we can see through, even though we know there aren't any holes. The children, like I say, they live in a magical world where strange things happen all the time. That's easy for them to play that game. So somebody came up with that metaphor that worked. That is, seeing the dot of light, letting it grow and get bigger. That's a metaphor that works for kids, so they adapt to it very quickly. So the goggles, the points of light, the holes, all of that is just metaphorical things that are not necessary, but make it easier.
Okay, to add on to that, what you just said about seeing with eyes open, I saw one documentary which actually was even broadcasted on Austrian television, but on a local station, where they also reported about the seeing without eyes. And there they also said, well, it can actually really help people to get rid of their glasses because they can do what you just said. They can see with their mind's eye and don't need the physical eyes anymore. And that actually works, but it's probably another bit of training. And the other thing is, I also had the opportunity to meet with a 12-year-old boy that was blind from birth. And I visited him at home and met him and his brother and his parents and kind of got to know him a bit. And he also is now able to see. Now we have to clarify a bit about what he's able to see. So the first thing is he was blind from birth. When he was young, he got a little bit of light vision, so he could differentiate light and dark. So he was not completely blind anymore, but he's legally 100% blind still. And he was able, through the seeing without eyes, learning seeing without eyes, to really get a clearer picture. He's able to read now. But he doesn't have full vision. It's not like he sees like we do. He still is really handicapped, and he still goes to the special institution for the blind, where he has been for all his life so far. But he has significant improvements in his eyesight, and that's a blind boy. So
right, and the state of his vision, though it comes into those constraints where he can't see as well as we do. That's not because he can't see as well as we do using the mind's eye. He can get the data fine. It's just that he has, because he's been blind, he has beliefs that he can't see well. If he keeps working with it and keeps being encouraged, he will be able to see as well as we do. It's not that that's impossible because there's something wrong with his, optic nerve. This doesn't have anything to do with the optic nerve. It has nothing to do with the brain. It's not enabled by the physical body. This is an information stream coming to these children. They are consciousness, not bodies. And they get this information, they interpret it as being this reality. Now, he may have some difficulty interpreting because he doesn't have all the background of seeing things and knowing what they are. So he would have to be like an infant. He would have to learn, like, this is red, this is blue, because somebody would have to tell him. Otherwise, he wouldn't know. See, that sort of thing. He would have to start at the very beginning of seeing and learn how to interpret the data. But if he works at it, he could have as good a vision as any of these children with their mask on, or as an adult. The information is there, but there's all sorts of barriers to us just accepting that and connecting to that information and using it. And you mentioned about this people that could see better without, with their eyes open and didn't need their glasses as much. Well, I had never heard of that. I was just talking about, my MBT theory, and the way my theory says that this should work and the things that you could do. And it's nice that you come up with a nice little example that verifies, what I'm saying.
Right. Yeah. At least that was reported on this Austrian documentary that you can also find on my website. I have a link to it. About the blind boy, just to clarify that, I think one of the reasons why he's not getting better is he likes to go to the school he goes to. And he made a very clear point about that. He loves going to that school. So what do you do with a blind boy going to a blind school, suddenly being able to see? I think there is a part of him that does not want to do that. And so he's kind of blocking himself at the moment. That's my interpretation. I mean, I didn't talk about him that precisely about it, but I think that's the problem. Why he's not really getting better.
Well, that's true for most everybody. You know, we all have our own little life situations that we've created, and to make a dramatic change is frightening. It's kind of a scary thing. There's fear around change, and if he suddenly had clear vision, that would change his life in all sorts of ways. And some of them might be good, and some of them might be things that he can't even imagine, but others could be a little scary. It would just upset his whole balance of interactions that he does in his life. So yes, there are these things that then act as constraints to limit what it is he's able to do.
Okay, talking about blind people, maybe you should briefly talk about dark rooms, since that was also something I asked the kids about. And well, the answers I got from the interviews were a little bit different. Luan and Lenny, the two boys, reported that they could distinguish colors in complete darkness, and Luan did a test, and Lenny did a test, at least with their parents. Now, I cannot verify that; I can just report on it, but it seems trustworthy to me. But the other girl, for example, said she needs light in the room to see through the masks. And so we are talking again about beliefs, right?
Right. We're talking about a metaphor. She has a metaphor that there are holes in her mask that she can see through. That's her metaphor. That's what justifies in her mind that this is possible. If she thought it was impossible, she wouldn't see anything at all. So that justifies the possibility. But now you have a dark room. You've just kind of ruined her justification there, because she's thinking that she has to see light coming through holes in her mask. Of course, these aren't any real holes. They're just metaphorical holes in her mask. But the metaphor, she can't expand that metaphor to allow dark rooms, because that was her tool that she's using to see. So it's just another belief, whereas the other boys who can see in the dark, they may restrict themselves just to colors or to something else. Yeah, I can't read in the dark, but I can see colors. Well, if you can read anywhere, you can read, if you can read with a blindfold on, you can read just as easily in the dark. Putting them in the dark, it was a really good question. Can you do this in the dark? Because that completely eliminates the idea there's something physical going on, because in a dark room, there are no photons. There is no light. And to be able to distinguish colors or see shapes or read a book in complete darkness takes the idea of, there's a physical reason, and basically, tosses that out. There can be no physical reason in a dark room. So all of the complaints from, leaky light through the mask, everything else disappears in a dark room. Now, the way logic works is that if anybody can do it, if there's just one kid who says, oh yeah, I can read in the dark and I can see things, on the wall in the dark, dark room is not a problem, that shows that it is possible. You only need one person to do that. That shows that this works. It is possible. You see, you don't need 100% of the people to do that. You just need one. And that shows the possibility of it. So I think that any of them could do that, but they have beliefs that limit them, like the eyehole metaphor. If somebody pointed out, well, there are no eye holes, you're not really seeing through eye holes, you're seeing with your mind, maybe that would stump them because that's too abstract a concept and they're young children, or maybe that would just clear it up and, oh, I don't need the eye holes. I can see through eye holes even in the dark. These are special nifty eye holes that let you see in the dark. Then it would be, they could do it again. So yes, seeing in the dark is, my theory would say whether it's dark or not, it's irrelevant. This has nothing to do with the physical body, the optic nerve, or light. It has to do with getting information from a database, and whether it's light or dark is irrelevant to that process.
Okay, let's move on to one other short subject, and that is the zoom effect, which I really don't have any idea why that should happen. But I mean, several of the kids reported that they see objects a little bit closer than they are without the mask. Do you have any idea why the LCS would do that?
No, I don't. Some of them did, some of them did not. Some of them, when you said, well, what's the difference between seeing with the mask on and seeing without it? Well, I shouldn't say most, some of them at least said there's really no difference. It's just about the same.
Yeah,
There's
right.
hardly any difference.
Luan actually said that it was lighter. He saw with more light in the mask than
Yeah,
without the mask.
right.
Right.
One of them saw that it was lighter. But the fact that when they were climbing the pegs, they saw things a little differently. They expected the peg, this was a climbing wall where they had little pegs that you had to put your hands and feet on. They saw pegs to be a little closer than what they really were because they reached out for them and were surprised that it wasn't exactly where they saw it. That's probably because they are seeing the information, you see, of what's there in front of them. But now they have to judge that information relative to themselves and where they are and where their hand is and where their body is relative to that. So the idea that things look a little further away or a little closer maybe is because they're not sure where they fit in that picture. They may not be seeing themselves in that picture. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They are only seeing things, and without yourself being in the picture, then it's a little harder. So if you see your hand as you reach out for the thing and you see your hand moving toward it, then you will feel it actually when your hand gets there. And they're a little surprised that their hand doesn't get there until a little after when they thought their hand should get there. So why that would be the case, I have no idea. I suspect it just has some little quirk of the way they are interpreting their model in their mind of what's going on causes that. Maybe they're just thinking, well, this is kind of an odd thing to do. It couldn't be perfect. There must be problems with it, and they may just create a little problem like that just to satisfy that belief that there probably will be problems.
Okay, moving on to the next subject. That is something I actually did not cover in the documentary, and that is 360-degree vision. There are a few kids, very few kids, that actually have the ability, once they see without their eyes, to see like a 360-degree vision, and you can hold like colored papers behind the head, and they can tell you what color they are. But that's kind of a rare condition. But the idea would be, how would you explain that?
Well, that would be very similar to they can see things going on in other rooms. It's just data. There's data there for all sorts of things. Their intent is what determines what data they get. So if they have an intent that says, I'd like to look behind me, I'd like to see what's going on in the next room, I'd like to see the back side of the moon and see what's happening over there. I'd like to see, what's going on at the main square in Paris. They could see any of those things. Remote viewers can see any of those things. They could even say, I'd like to see into the past. I'd like to see into the probable future. That's all in the database too. They could see those things as well. There's no limit on what they can see. It doesn't have anything to do with their physical body or whether it's behind their head in another room or in front of them. They're getting data from a database, and this data is available. What happens is that if they have the metaphor that they're looking through little holes in the mask, and that's their belief, if you will, that's their metaphor for what's going on, then they are constrained to seeing what you could see through the peepholes in the mask. So they can only see what's in front of them. And can you see behind you? No. Why not? Because they believe they're looking through peepholes in the mask. But some children, a few children, will generalize that because they know there aren't any peepholes, and they know they're not they're not limited to what comes through imaginary peepholes. So they just aren't trapped by that. They don't have that belief. They say, well, there's not really peepholes anyway. Why not? Sure. Let's see. What's behind me? So now they have an intent to know what's behind them, and they get the data from the database because of that intent about what's behind them or what's in the next room or what's on the dark side of the moon, wherever they are. So the data is available from the databases, and they are getting that data. Their props, their beliefs, their metaphors limit what they get. That's kind of the overall thing. So yes, you could see behind you as well as you could see any place. The data is basically here for the universe. You know, it's the system, the computer will give you data as you query it, as you give a request for particular data. And if you think that data couldn't possibly be available, then it won't be, because you limit it. You won't be able to push that request out, that query out from your being level, because your being level says that's ridiculous.
Okay, regarding the kids that can see through walls, for example, which you just mentioned. I mean, these are really rare cases, just to be clear about that. But something I pondered about is if kids can do that. I mean, kids are good at playing. They don't really think much about what they do. But what is happening when they do maybe things that they're not supposed to do? Maybe they are peeking in rooms where they shouldn't. Maybe they see things that maybe could even hurt them to see. I mean, you never know what you see when you peek into a room that nobody knows you're peeking in. So what are your thoughts about this whole ethical issue when kids do things which get skills which allow them to do things which maybe they shouldn't?
Yes, well, kids and adults can really get into these databases and see whatever they intend from the database. But I would have to have some data on this to make sure that what I'm saying is going to be correct. But I would guess, from knowing the system, knowing the larger conscious system from my own experience, that what would happen if it was going to be detrimental to that child, if it was going to be an entropy raiser rather than an entropy reducer, if it was just going to puff up their ego or make them feel like they're smarter and better than other people, if there was things going on in their exercise of this database that were going to be negative, hurt them, as you say, or things that they might see that they can't process, that they don't understand, that would be harmful to them or confuse them, I would guess that they won't get that data. The system won't send them that data. So that won't be a problem. This is not like the physical world. You know, in the physical world, if you had, if you had magic eyes in the physical world, then you could see anything and there wouldn't be any ethical barriers on it because it would just be a physical thing. But it's not a physical thing. This is coming from the larger consciousness system out of a database, and there is constraints on it. The point is that the system is helping these kids grow up, see a bigger picture, understand things in a bigger way, not be so trapped by their beliefs. It's showing them that more is possible than they thought. And it's also showing their parents, and when you make a video like you made, a documentary, it's showing, hundreds of thousands of other people that there's more possibilities here than we thought, that we're not physical beings constrained with the physical senses. We're consciousness, and we can explore and know and interact with more than just what's here in the physical world. So that's the point of it. And if that turns bad, if that's not positive, then I suspect it'll just stop. They won't get that data anymore. So I would even imagine if you had a child that, because they could see with their eyes closed, started bragging about it and felt that they were much better than other people who couldn't do it, that child would start to lose the ability to do that, because now it would be hurting them growing up rather than helping them. So it's not just a skill that they learn that they can do whenever they want. They're engaging with an intelligent consciousness system. And there is that constraint placed on it as well. And we'll get to a little more of that when we talk about your last point here. You want to talk about the uncertainty principle. That will kind of come back to this subject again.
Actually, we are right at that question, so I'll just go ahead and ask.
All right, what a segue, right into it. Okay.
So The last question I have is related to the science certainty principle and scientific research into the whole seeing without eyes issues. Do you think that the science certainty principle will intervene if, for example, scientists put a child into a highly controlled setting and ask it to read without its eyes, for example, doing that in a brain scanner where you can directly identify which areas of the brain light up to identify the entry point, quote unquote, within a materialistic viewpoint? What do you think would the science certainty principle do when we do that with a child?
Well, the psi uncertainty principle is basically it's not so much a rule, part of the rule set, as it is policy of the larger consciousness system in running this virtual reality. And the point of it is to not allow this understanding, this use of psi, to get to the point that it becomes destructive. Okay? So as long as it is helping people see larger realities, opening eyes, as long as it's doing that, then it's constructive, it's positive. It's moving the system in the way the larger conscious system wants to go. If it becomes destructive, or if there's even potential for it to become destructive, that is that people who would misuse it and abuse it, you talk about looking at things that you shouldn't look at. We can see the espionage people have been doing remote viewing now for many, many decades. So it is used for that sort of thing. And I suspect, corporations use it to spy on the secrets of their competitors and so on. So where it can be misused and abused, violations of privacy and ethical issues, then it won't work. It'll stop working and the database won't support it. So it's not like it's a physical thing that I have a skill and I can use that skill any way I want. It's not like that. You're getting data in cooperation with the larger consciousness system. So it could be that we'll have this little outbreak of kids in maybe various countries. I think they do something similar in the UK. As far as being able to see without eyes, they have totally different way of going about it. But it may be that this will happen 3 or 4 places, and there'll be maybe a few hundred kids that'll learn, and it'll open eyes, and people will do documentaries like you, and it'll go out in the population, and it'll help people wake up and see a bigger picture. It'll help them realize that we're not trapped in materialism here. We're consciousness, that this is a virtual reality. And it could be that that's enough. The system will have gotten everything out of it that it wants, was just as a mind opener. And after that, it'll stop working. And it just won't happen anymore. And people will take the training and it just won't seem to work anymore. And that would be because the psi uncertainty principle says, this was starting to get a little much. People, once your scientists get hold of it and take them into the lab and do all this, and it becomes known information that this will work, now you're opening up a can of worms, and it may be the system doesn't want to open up that can of worms. It may not want to have to police so much effort. That's more trouble for it to have to do that. So it could be that it could just disappear. But that doesn't mean that it isn't real. It doesn't mean that it was a mass hallucination. It will open minds, and that's its point. Now, are we grown up enough in the world today to take this information and use it wisely, to use it to grow, use it to understand more about the reality that we live in? If we can, as a culture and as a species, use this profitably, then it's likely that it won't stop, that it will be studied by scientists, and they will realize that it works. I mean, look at remote viewing. Scientists have studied that and studied that. We've got 30, 40 years of research on remote viewing. And obviously it works well enough that many governments, including the U.S. government, I suspect many others, employ remote viewers because it gives them some information about what's going on elsewhere that otherwise wouldn't be available to them. So remote viewing is studied. Scientists have been studying that, and it doesn't stop. It just continues to work. But the larger world basically doesn't pay much attention to it. They go, oh yeah, remote viewing. They probably made all that up, and they go on about their business. They don't get involved. So it's not creating a problem with the psi uncertainty principle because it remains positive. It doesn't cause problems. So that's kind of the answer to this ethics problem, as well as the problem of how does this work into the future? Can we look at a future world where everybody will be able to see in the dark? Everybody will be able to drive a car just as well at night as in the daytime. People won't need glasses. They'll be able to get the data directly from the database. There won't be any blind people because all the people who don't have good, healthy optic nerves or optical processing parts of their brain that are functional, they can still see. Yes, that's all possible, but will we get there? I don't know. It just depends on whether we as a population can accept this data and work with it positively, that we won't abuse it. We won't go to places that we shouldn't. We won't violate other people's privacy. We won't do these things in a major way. Yes, they happen in the margins, and as long as it's in the margins, psi uncertainty principle doesn't mind too much. If it becomes a massive thing where it's not in the margins, it's in the mainstream, well, then we just have to wait and see whether or not we are capable of having that now, or whether we're just going to have to wait a while until we grow up. And as we grow up, these things will become available to us. So I know that's not really a great answer that people would like to hear. They'd like to hear something that's hard and fast because it's a machine, and a machine always works this way. This is not a machine. This is consciousness. It's a larger conscious system, which is a conscious, intelligent thing. It's running a virtual reality of which this physical universe of ours is that virtual reality. Now, I'm not going through the details of that. If anybody finds that to be particularly a strange set of concepts, then you can find lots of things in my books and videos that will explain why that is a good idea, and what sort of things can you derive, what kind of facts can you derive from that. But in any case, don't really know how this might turn out. It may just keep going, live in the margins, not become a major thing, and still be around, for decades. Or it may just snuffle out and not, stop being something that people can learn and do. You never know. That depends. The system has control over the databases and control over access to the databases. Generally, it does not like to police that. It just likes to let it all happen the way it happens. It doesn't like to be heavy-handed. But if it has to, in order to keep us from taking something and misusing it, then it can. Now, whether it will or not, I don't know, but it can.
Well, Tom, thank you very much for taking the time to demystify the psi phenomena of seeing without eyes. I hope you, the viewer, enjoyed this new format, and if you did, let us know which psi phenomena you would like us to cover in the next episode, and we'll take it into consideration.
Thank you, Oliver. I think this is a grand idea, and as we come up with these little psi things, and they don't have to actually be things in the present. There's been a lot of strange things that have been recorded out of the past, and many of them are on your website. We could deal with those as well.
Sure, and we will in the future. So thank you very much. I hope that a few skeptics will take it serious, and probably a few more will say, well, Tom is now a real nutcase.
Yeah, well, they say that anyway. So people say whatever they believe, and they believe whatever they want. So that is not a problem. But it's good to know that these things do have a rational explanation behind them. And it's also good to know that you shouldn't expect that explanation to be deterministic. It's not a machine. It's not like, well, we have this ability to see, then anybody can see anything, anywhere, anytime, and all we have to do is all train for it. Well, that may or may not work out that way. It's not a machine. It's something quite different than a machine, and it isn't just a matter of training and doing it. If it's positive, it'll be easy. If it's not, it won't. Is that they get to actually ask me questions about how it works and what's going on and why it works, because I suspect that most of the people doing this don't have any theory at all to explain it. They're completely blank when it comes to what's happening and why is it happening this way and what are the limitations. And if they understand things like holes in the mask are just metaphors, and those metaphors come with constraints. If you believe there's holes in the masks and that's your metaphor for allowing you to see, now you're stuck and you can't see behind you and you necessarily can't see anything or everything because the holes are too close together, too far apart, and all these other issues come with that particular metaphor. And once they realize that you have to be careful how you choose your metaphors, and that's why there's only a few kids that can see behind them and into other rooms, because there's only a few kids who can generalize the concept and not have a problem with it. That's why that's not common. Most kids can't generalize the concept and not have a problem with it. They have to work within that metaphor of the holes in the mask. Others can take a step beyond that because they realize it's a metaphor, and why not? So anyway, if they understand it, it'll help them free up some of the constraints that they're finding, and it may make them easier for the adults to actually do it because they'll see that it's possible. It's not such a crazy idea, that there's theory, there's science behind it. Well, that little girl playing air hockey is very impressive. That's a very impressive image, that this little girl has a mask on that doesn't allow her to see anything, and she's doing something, as you point out in the film, that requires very fast reaction time and precision as to where she moves her arm. And that means she's not just getting a fuzzy general idea of things. She's really has up to the minute, up to the instant data coming in, just as she would with her eyes. Yeah, I was impressed with that air hockey. I'm glad they had her doing that, because that really said a lot to me, to the level of that they were getting the data. Yeah, reading is also impressive, but you can sit and look at it and reading, and even if you can't see too well, you can kind of make out the words and do pretty well. But to play that air hockey game, that was speed and precision, and there isn't any way to think that was anything other than crystal clear vision, wherever the vision came from.
Right. Yeah. Actually, her name is Svea. That's what's interesting to know about her. She's a very intellectual person. She's extremely good at school, which actually had the downside that it took her 7 hours to learn to see without her eyes. Julius, who is her little brother, was really quick at being able to do it. They had a real problem, because usually the roles were her being the smart one and Julius not being really good at school stuff. Now, the roles were completely reversed. It took her 7 hours to learn it, and she was very ambitious to do it because her little brother could do it so quickly. So.
Yes, indeed. That is just as the theory would predict. The intellectuals are going to have problems with this, which is why the adults have problems with it. They run their lives and their realities out of their intellect, and their intellect says, "Oh, that's impossible." So yes, it takes longer to sit there until you let go, and some people will never let go. Adults, she may have had 7 children that couldn't let go of their beliefs, but you're going to run into a lot higher percentage of the adults that just can't let go of their beliefs, can't get to the being level, and because their mind is telling them, this is impossible, this is stupid, what are you doing sitting here with this mask on trying to see? That's just an oxymoron, it doesn't work. And they'll have those ideas running around in their mind, in the back of their mind all the time, and they won't be able to shut it off. So I suspect in the adult classes, it won't be everybody but 1 or 2 does it. It'll be some of the people do it, sort of like the spoon bending. They'll have spoon bending courses, and if 20 people are in the course, there's usually 4 or 5 that actually bend spoons, and the rest of them fail. They don't actually bend a spoon because they can't let go of their beliefs enough to do it.